The first time German pilots got a close look at the P-51 Mustang, it was like nothing they had ever faced before. In the skies over Europe, where Luftwaffe pilots had long dominated with aircraft they knew intimately, the Mustang immediately stood out as a game-changer. Its sleek design, powerful engine, and long, graceful wings gave it an unmistakable presence in the air. And even at first glance, it was clear this plane was in a different league. As the P-51 sliced through the sky during test flights or combat encounters, German pilots couldn't help but notice its incredible speed. It could climb faster, accelerate more sharply, and sustain higher velocities than most Luftwaffe fighters. For aviators who had spent years mastering planes like the Bf-109 or FW-190, seeing the Mustang in action was a jolt. But it wasn't just speed that left them stunned. Maneuverability was equally remarkable. The P-51 could turn on a dime, roll quickly, and respond to controls with astonishing precision. German pilots realized almost immediately that their usual dogfighting techniques, diving, climbing, banking in tight formations, wouldn't be enough to outmatch this new aircraft. Every movement had to be measured differently. Every tactic they had relied on for years seemed almost obsolete. Even seasoned veterans, who were confident in their own abilities and the capabilities of their machines, had to acknowledge that they were now up against a fighter that fundamentally changed the rules of aerial combat. Range was another factor that struck fear into the Luftwaffe. The P-51 could escort bombers deep into Germany, far beyond the reach of previous Allied fighters. This meant that German cities and industrial centers were no longer as safe from strategic bombing as they once had been. The Mustang's endurance forced German pilots to consider not just individual dogfights but the larger implications. Allied bombers would reach their targets with cover, and interception opportunities would become limited. The combination of speed, maneuverability, and range made the P-51 more than a threat. It was a symbol of the Allies' growing dominance in the air. Even in initial combat tests, the Mustang demonstrated a deadly synergy of these capabilities. German pilots found themselves in split-second situations where the Mustang could outpace, outturn, and outgun them in the same engagement. The very first encounters shattered confidence. What had once been familiar territory in the skies, where skill, numbers, and tactics could decide the outcome, was now dramatically altered. There was a sinking realization among Luftwaffe pilots. This wasn't just a plane. It was a paradigm shift. From that moment on, German pilots knew they were no longer fighting on equal footing. The P-51 Mustang was not just another Allied aircraft. It was a weapon that demanded respect, adaptation, and a re-evaluation of strategy. First impressions were powerful, and for the Luftwaffe, the P-51's debut left no illusions. They could see its superiority immediately, and with that clarity came a sobering truth. If the Allies kept deploying this plane in force, the Luftwaffe would be fighting a losing battle in the skies over Europe. Once German pilots faced the P-51 Mustang in combat, the reality of its superiority became undeniable. These were some of the most experienced aviators in the Luftwaffe. Men who had spent years honing their skills in planes like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf FW-190. They knew how to dive, climb, and outmaneuver almost any opponent. But the Mustang changed everything. Its combination of speed, firepower, and agility rendered the tactics they had relied on for years nearly useless. Dogfights that once favored their experience now became exercises in frustration, with pilots realizing too late that the Mustang's capabilities far exceeded what they could counter with conventional maneuvers. Traditional Luftwaffe tactics, high-speed dives, turning engagements, and coordinated formation attacks, were met with devastating results. The P-51 could match or exceed their dive speeds, roll faster than expected, and turn sharply without losing energy. German pilots tried to adapt, attempting flanking maneuvers or climbing to gain the high ground. But the Mustang's performance often neutralized these efforts. What would have been a calculated advantage in a typical engagement now became a dangerous gamble. Time and again, pilots found themselves outmatched not because of lack of skill, but because their machines simply could not compete. Even veteran Luftwaffe pilots began to acknowledge the hopelessness of certain encounters. They understood that engaging a P-51 without support or superior numbers was essentially a suicide mission. The Mustang's long range meant it could appear unexpectedly, strike quickly, and retreat before any reinforcements could arrive. Pilots who had once prided themselves on being able to control the air in any situation suddenly faced a plane that dictated the tempo of the fight, forcing them into reactive positions where mistakes were punished immediately. The psychological impact was just as severe as the physical one. Knowing that your best tactics were failing against a single aircraft created fear, hesitation, and diminished confidence. Combat reports from these early encounters consistently highlighted the same theme. Attempts to outmaneuver or ambush the Mustang often ended in disaster. Experienced pilots who had survived countless battles now found themselves on the defensive, their formations shredded, their numbers dwindling. The Mustang's combination of speed and firepower allowed it to pick apart enemy aircraft before they could coordinate an effective response. Dogfights became lethal tests of patience and precision, and the Luftwaffe quickly realized that without new strategies or technological upgrades, continued engagements would result in predictable losses. The P-51 fundamentally altered the dynamics of aerial combat. No longer could German pilots rely on old doctrines or sheer skill to maintain dominance. The Mustang forced a reassessment of strategy, a recognition that the air war had shifted decisively in favor of the Allies. For the Luftwaffe, each failed dogfight was more than a lost aircraft. It was a clear message that the war in the skies had entered a new phase, one where old methods were insufficient and defeat became increasingly likely. By the end of these early encounters, the lesson was painfully clear. The P-51 was not just another plane. It was a revolutionary force in the air. And German pilots knew that without innovation, numerical superiority, or significant tactical adjustments, they were facing a losing battle. The Mustang had changed the rules of engagement, leaving the Luftwaffe scrambling to keep up while Allied air supremacy steadily solidified. The encounters with the P-51 Mustang weren't just tactical lessons for German pilots. They revealed a far larger strategic reality. As the Luftwaffe struggled to keep pace with the Mustang's superior speed, maneuverability, and range, the Allies gained a decisive advantage that went well beyond individual dogfights. The P-51's long range allowed Allied fighters to escort bombers deep into German territory, ensuring that bombing raids could reach critical industrial centers and military targets without being cut down by enemy interceptors. What once had been a dangerous gamble for bomber crews now became a calculated and more survivable operation. German pilots could no longer assume they would encounter only limited numbers of Allied aircraft near the front lines. Every strike mission risked being intercepted by Mustangs, shifting the balance of power decisively. This shift in air dominance had immediate implications. German pilots knew that even their best defensive strategies were increasingly ineffective. The Mustang forced the Luftwaffe to operate reactively rather than proactively. No longer could they dictate the terms of engagement. The P-51 set the pace, choosing when and how battles occurred. The psychological impact on German aircrews was profound. Confidence in their ability to control the skies waned, and morale began to erode. When an enemy can appear anywhere at any time, strike effectively, and disappear, it's not just a tactical disadvantage. It's a strategic one. Commanders on both sides realized that air supremacy was no longer a distant goal. It had shifted into the hands of the Allies. The Mustang's influence extended beyond immediate engagements to the overall trajectory of the air war. By consistently protecting Allied bombers on long-range missions, the P-51 ensured that Germany's industrial and logistical infrastructure came under increasing pressure. Factories, rail lines, and supply depots could no longer operate with impunity. Every successful bombing raid weakened the German war effort, and the presence of the P-51 meant that such raids could happen with far fewer losses to Allied air crews. The Luftwaffe's inability to respond effectively accelerated the erosion of German strategic capabilities. Even high-ranking officers acknowledged that without a revolutionary new aircraft or overwhelming numbers, regaining air supremacy was increasingly unlikely. The broader lesson was clear. Air combat was no longer just about individual skill or tactical ingenuity. It was about technological edge and strategic positioning. The Mustang exemplified how innovation could alter the entire battlefield. For the Allies, it wasn't merely a fighter. It was a force multiplier that reshaped the air war, gave bombers a vital lifeline, and forced the enemy into a defensive posture. For the Luftwaffe, it was a sobering wake-up call that their previous dominance in the skies could not withstand this level of technological advancement. By the time the P-51 was fully operational in large numbers, the writing was on the wall. German pilots knew that the air war had irrevocably changed. The Mustang's combination of speed, maneuverability, and range gave the Allies unprecedented freedom in the air, allowing them to strike at the heart of Germany with reduced risk and increasing effectiveness. The Luftwaffe could no longer dictate engagements, and every encounter became an uphill battle. The P-51 didn't just win dogfights. It reshaped the strategy of the European air war, cementing Allied air superiority and signaling an inevitable shift toward victory in the skies over Europe.